Imagine nature runs an experiment. It picks two countries on opposite sides of the Atlantic and gives them the identical gift, oceans of oil. One of them is a cold, rainy strip of fjords with 5 million people. The other has the largest proven oil reserves on planet Earth, more than Saudi Arabia. 50 years later, the results are in. The small, cold one has turned its oil into $2 trillion, about $385,000 of national savings for every citizen. The one with the biggest reserves in the world has watched its economy shrink by 80%, its prices rise by 130,000%, and nearly 8 million of its people walk out of the country. Same gift, opposite endings. Today, the most expensive lesson in economics, told by Norway and Venezuela. This is the money atlas, and this is the story of the resource curse and the one country that broke it. Quick thing before we dig in. If you enjoy stories that make the world make sense, subscribing is the best way to see the next one, and it costs you nothing. All right, let's get into it. Start in the North Sea, 3 days before Christmas, 1969. After years of dry wells, and after Norway's own geological survey had basically concluded there was nothing there, the drilling rig Ocean Viking hits the Ekofisk field, one of the largest offshore oil discoveries in history. Norway at the time was a modest economy of fishermen, farmers, and shipbuilders. Suddenly, it was sitting on a fortune, and here's where the story takes its first strange turn, because Norway's reaction to striking oil was not celebration. It was something closer to suspicion. In 1974, the Norwegian parliament wrote down 10 commandments for handling the oil, and buried inside them was a radical philosophy. This wealth doesn't belong to us. It belongs to every future generation of Norwegians, equally, which changes everything. If the money isn't yours, you can't spend it. You become its guardian, not its owner. It took until 1990 to build the machine for that idea, a national fund where oil revenue would be locked away, and in 1996 the first deposit went in. The rules were brutal by political standards. Every krone of oil profit goes into the fund. The fund invests only outside Norway, and the government may spend only the fund's expected return, about 3% a year, never the principal, ever. Compound that discipline for 30 years and you get a number that doesn't sound real. Over $2 trillion, the largest sovereign wealth fund on Earth, owned by 5.5 million people. It holds a stake in roughly 1.5% of every publicly traded company in the world. Apple, Nestlé, Toyota, Samsung. A Norwegian nurse owns a sliver of all of them. In 2025 alone, the fund's investments earned $248 billion. Read that carefully. Norway now makes more money from owning the world's companies than from its own oil. The treasure outgrew the treasure map. Now cross the Atlantic. Venezuela isn't just an oil country, it's the oil country. 300 billion barrels of proven reserves, the largest on the planet. In the 1970s, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America, a democracy with skyscrapers, oil-funded universities, and the swagger of a future superpower. Venezuelans had a phrase for their country: Saudi Venezuela. If oil made countries rich, Venezuela should today be the wealthiest nation in human history. So what happened? Not one disaster of philosophy, the exact opposite of Norway's. Where Norway said, "This money belongs to the future," Venezuela's governments, decades of them, long before the current era, treated oil as a political ATM. Oil money didn't get saved. It got spent at the wellhead, on subsidies, patronage, and gasoline so cheap it was effectively free. And when oil prices were high, Venezuela didn't just spend all the money, it borrowed against barrels it hadn't pumped yet. Norway invests only abroad. Venezuela poured everything into the domestic economy, which brings us to the trap hiding inside every resource boom. Economists call it Dutch disease, and it works like slow poison. Here's the mechanism in 30 seconds. When a country exports huge amounts of oil, money floods in and its currency strengthens. Sounds great, until you notice that a strong currency makes everything else the country produces too expensive for the world to buy. Factories close, farms shrink, engineers move to the oil sector. Slowly, invisibly, the economy forgets how to do anything but pump. Then one day the oil price falls and there's nothing underneath. Norway dodged this by exporting its oil money, parking it abroad so it couldn't inflate the home economy. Venezuela drank every drop. By 2013, oil was 96% of Venezuela's exports. And then Venezuela did something even the resource curse doesn't require. It broke its own oil company. After a political strike in 2003, the government fired around 19,000 of PDVSA's most experienced engineers and managers, nearly half the workforce, and refilled the company with political loyalists. Maintenance stopped. Expertise walked out the door forever. Watch the line: 2.9 million barrels a day in 2013, under 400,000 by 2020. The country with the largest reserves on Earth was importing gasoline. It's the deepest irony in economics. Venezuela didn't run out of oil. It ran out of the people who knew how to pump it. Add it all up. From 2013 to 2025, Venezuela's economy contracted by roughly 80%, from about $350 billion to $83 billion. That's not a recession. That's a peacetime collapse with almost no historical equal. Hyperinflation peaked above 130,000% in 2018, prices doubling every few weeks, salaries evaporating between morning and evening. Even in 2025, inflation ran at 475%, still the highest on Earth. Meanwhile, Norway, the country that refused to spend its oil money, sailed through every oil crash of the last 30 years without blinking. The fund was the shock absorber. But the real scoreboard isn't GDP. It's people. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans, a quarter of the population, have left their country, the largest displacement in the history of the Americas. Doctors driving taxis in Lima, engineers waiting tables in Bogotá. On the other side of the experiment, every Norwegian citizen holds, on paper, $385,000 of collective savings, plus free universities, universal health care, and pensions guaranteed by the fund their grandparents refused to spend. The same molecule, hydrocarbon, produced both outcomes, which means the oil was never the variable. So what was the variable? Institutions, and one specific, deeply unnatural act: the ability of politicians to say no to money in their hands. Norway's 3% rule survives because no party dares break it. The fund is politically untouchable, watched by 5 million shareholder citizens. Venezuela's oil went wherever the government of the day needed votes. Economists have a name for the pattern, the resource curse, and the data is grim. Resource-rich countries have, on average, grown slower than resource-poor ones for decades. Remember Switzerland, rich with nothing. Resources are not destiny. They're an amplifier. They make good institutions richer and bad institutions catastrophic. Two countries, one gift. One turned it into the future. One turned it into an exodus. If your country ever strikes it rich, lithium, gas, rare earths, anything, you now know the only question that matters: who's allowed to touch the money? So do 3 quick things. Tap like so more people find it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And turn on notifications because next time we lighten up and walk the world's most profitable maze. How IKEA flat boxes, $1 hot dogs, and unbuildable shelves quietly conquered the planet. All the sources are in the description. This has been the Money Atlas. See you in the next one.